Wendy, it is so exciting to be chatting to you again on the Global Movement Summit.
It's a pleasure to be here.
I know it's surreal that, I mean, we've been chatting all this time, but like it's surreal that how much time has flown since our last big conversation and since honoring this space in this way.
Well, I remember the last conversation we had for the Global Summit. I was in a different city, and it really does seem like a different world and a different life away.
It sure does. It sure does. And it's almost appropriate in terms of like where we're wanting to kind of plant the seed in terms of polarity, because like everything's just switching up. And what I'm so grateful for is when we connected yesterday, just to kind of speak into where we're at and a little bit of the topic, because this idea of polarity is also, it's something that's not so well understood. Like, we always think of magnetisms and polar opposites and the yin and yang of everything. And it's like, wait, so we have to choose one or the other? And that statement you made yesterday of like, there's a both and, there's something deeper to this. It doesn't have to be separate. There's a way that it comes together is so, so, so beautiful. So I just kind of wanted to start there because I think that will set the great framework for the conversation moving ahead.
Well, that's yeah, absolutely. I mean, the concept of the polarity, for a long time, I thought that it was polar opposites. And in this conversation, I'd love to introduce the idea that a polarity is not necessarily two opposites on a pole, but two complementary value systems that exist and can exist simultaneously. So as you said, it's not necessarily and that's what I'm hoping we'll explore today. This concept of polarities being more like paradoxes, as opposed to defining opposites that one has got to choose. That's part of where the problem comes in. I was thinking earlier about we have such a ingrained sense of working with problems. And I think that it comes a lot from our education. That we are 97% of our education is around here's the answer and it's right or wrong. Multiple choice, it's either or, and it's great, and it serves a purpose. And for I think that the either or, both and, is a polarity in itself. One complements the other, and we're not wanting to necessarily say that one is better than the other, but that they can be supplementary. But that thinking is very ingrained in us, so that when we come into more complex problem solving, we tend to veer towards we have to solve it. It's got to be either this or that, which means basically bringing on board people that back us, that believe us, and we lose a lot of wisdom when we aren't able to hold the wider scope and the dance and the movement between those two.
Oh, beautiful. Because it's almost harrowing how we draw lines in the sands, and it's like it's this pendulum of you're either going to have this and you're going to have this, and we sit there going, but we want to have it all. And like, how do we integrate this? And as you know from coaching as well, it's like, it's so easy to make these big distinctions between things that we think don't go together. And the subtlety is actually noticing how they actually dance together.
Yes. And I think that it's interesting what you said about, having it all, because I want to say that, there's a caution around that, because we talk about this and it is a myth, and I'm not necessarily sure that it's a case of we can have it all. That to me, when I just feel that, it feels like quite a stretch. But if we play the dance, and if we can see that where we over focus on the one pole and reap the rewards of it, at some point there will be a move into the downside of that pole, and one will experience that, whether it's on a personal polarity or a more organizational polarity, and that will naturally take us into the upswing of the other pole. And again, where we start over focusing on that. So we can it's not as if we can sort of have 50-50 both, all, and winners in all sense. But where we begin to notice that we are over focusing on the one, we can start to course correct, self-correct, and lessen the downside. There will always
so it really
be
is about managing. So it's really about managing the spaces and the extremities in a bit of a way.
Absolutely. So the distinction becomes the difference between solving a problem or managing a polarity.
Speak more into that, because it's such a beautiful way of holding that. I mean, we've been so conditioned, as you rightly said, in the education system, to solve problems. As entrepreneurs, a lot of the people who are watching this is like, we've got to find a problem to solve in our things, and there's this other way of doing it. So what does that look like? Like, how can we play with this? This is so exciting. Tell me more.
Well, I tell you what excites me. What excites me about this is that the impact of working with polarities, and as coaches, the impact of being able to bring this, let me call it a wisdom, into our client relationships is far-reaching, because we're creating an awareness about how we move, how we are in the world. And the thing is that polarities exist in us. So just sitting and breathing, just dropping into the breath, you can already see that, this sounds ridiculous, but I'm using it as an example. If we overcompensate on the in-breath, we're going to need to release that. And so there's that cycle there in the breath. I did a lovely exercise with a psychotherapist not long ago, and she demonstrated polarities in such a simple way. And it was, she actually got us to move. And so we stood up on our 2 feet, and then she asked us to stand on one leg. And so it talks to where we're imbalanced as well. And it was very difficult to sustain that. And so when we moved on to the other leg, it was also difficult. So often that's what we're doing. We're either, we're over emphasizing or one area, as opposed to understanding that if we could let go of the resistance, we can gain more and therefore integrate more. So what excites me about this is that it is really a sort of system that we can see where we go in our resistance, but it's also a system where we can begin to integrate. When we combine, let me give you an example. Work and play, there are other words for that. Rest and motion. Let's just play with it a little bit more. Generating and activating and trusting and allowing. Can you see? I'm going to use the language that my clients speak to me, and I'm not going to assume that I'm, fixing a polarity on them. It might be that they talk more about, working on their business, working in their business. It might be that movement is around doing and being. So if we take that as an example, I know where my happy place is, and I'm very, very happy in being, and it's wonderful, and there are benefits, when I'm centered and, in my practices, I'm connected, I'm energized, I'm connected to source, I have a wisdom, I'm open, my heart is open. But you can begin to see that too much of that is going to create a movement in me where it might be that, I'm starting to wonder, where my work is coming from, or I'm getting a little bit anxious, or I'm not being driven, I'm not complementing that with other aspects that I need. Now, obviously, the movement is to move into more of a doing and more of a structure, as opposed to more flexible. But what is quite fascinating is that I'm happy to go there, but because I know that there's a downside to that, that too much of that will inevitably lead to a state that I don't enjoy, being stressed, overwhelmed, tense, not sleeping particularly. So I will often avoid that, and I will stick in this side only. So you can imagine working with that on an individual level and then looking at that on a systemic level in an organization, on a team. And because we don't know this, because it's largely hidden from us, it's in the shadow, it can be a total turnaround light switch moment.
For sure, because then you get to find where the complementaries are and how everyone benefits in that process.
I like that, but exactly, the complementaries. And what's fun about it is that, as I say, you look out for it, and you start to see them in your own life.
Of course.
You start to see them. We've just had a radical example, in yesterday's monolithic shifting of worlds, and in terms of our elections, but in America, and you've got two polar opposites. And you can see how that plays out. And the wisdom around, well, perhaps what about the middle? Would there not be more wisdom in finding somebody who is there inhabiting that middle space? But, so we're used to this world of either one or the other. So, yes.
That's an interesting question. Like, is the thing then move towards the middle? Because that can feel for a lot of people like the best of two worlds, but it could also feel like settling for less and not being able to create at your greatest or complete at your strongest, because that drive then falls out. So obviously that has a positive and negative side to it. Like, is there actually ever a middle point in this thing?
Well, if you think about it, if you are, and you've probably seen from my gestures, because I can't, not.
We'll start animating at any moment now.
Absolutely. When you're creating that movement, that middle point, I would say, is the crossover, is that point where you begin to integrate. So I would say that the conversation is more around how can we integrate, as opposed to how can we compromise. I still feel that takes us into a stage where we've lost something and we've gained but we've lost. And I'm very aware of that. In our politics in South Africa, there's a lot of language now around the compromise that was made in '94 and '92, etc. So and payoff as well. The language is not necessarily reflective of the wisdom of polarity.
Yeah.
If one can picture a quadrant, and the upside of the one, the downside of another, the upside of the one pole and the downside, this infinity loop, and imagine it as an energy loop. What we have at the top is actually our higher purpose. And what we have at the bottom is actually our deepest fear. So to answer your question, this
is so beautiful. This is so beautiful.
when we can manage polarities, and I'll give you a few little tips that I find useful at the moment. What we're actually doing is integrating by holding the both, allowing us to access our higher purpose. And that really depends on the polarity that you're working with in yourself, with an individual, with a team, with an organization. And for me, that sense is that it then allows you to free up yourself to move into another level, another state of consciousness, another polarity. So I don't experience it as a kind of giving up or a compromise. I think it's in Tantra, there's a sense that the question that one is asked is how alive do you want to be? How alive are you prepared to be? How much more expanded can you be? In other words, can your heart open a little bit more? And when you begin to explore that, you realize that there actually isn't a limit. There's always just that little bit more. And we'll contract again. And it's difficult to be open, and isn't the journey to be that a little bit more?
Absolutely. With every single little breath.
Yes.
And that, as you say, it allows you to unfold, it allows you to awaken into even more possibilities. I mean, this is where growth happens. This is where we really get to step into who we are. And just when you were saying purpose and our fears being on this pendulum as well, on this axis, there's also this remembrance that sometimes what we want the most is what we fear, and sometimes what we fear the most is what we want. But being able to notice that there's even polarity in that, and they work together again as complementaries.
Absolutely.
Everything just collapses upon itself, doesn't it, with this kind of work?
It's interesting. I mean, so in that sense, when you talk about growth, absolutely. For me, polarity is a way to encourage and nurture growth, but also sustainability, and I think that's important as well. So if you take, for example, the polarity of, say, stability and, well, what would be the opposite of that? Stability and change. Yes, I mean, that would certainly be a downside, but both, there's an interesting thing that you did. Chaos wouldn't work necessarily as a polarity because the two have to be complementary opposites. They are actually values. That's the thing. You want to move to both of them. You know, chaos you wouldn't want to necessarily go to, but it would be a downside of stability, innovation, stability, change. So again, you can see that even that in your own personal life, in the wider organizational development of an organization, you've got those two things playing all the time. You know, and stability is obviously going to give you continuity, and change is going to give you adaptability, and then there will be the downside of rigidity and stagnancy, and then, as you say, the downside of too much change. You see it in so many organizations, and it's like there's a hopelessness and a helplessness because there's just so much change. You don't know what's going on, and it's chaotic.
Absolutely. This disruption ends up causing more damage than it does good. It's almost like a power that you don't know how to manage.
Yes, absolutely. So, I mean, I know that you and I love the conversation around disruption and innovation. You know, we both have many talks about the world in the future to come. But again, to be able to balance that, I really love the genius types for that. And I was thinking that even there's a polarity. So I don't know whether you want to, as this is a conversation, speed into those 4 types, and then that will help me sort of talk into the polarity there.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I can only address them in their polarities then. So
yes,
should I do it that way?
Yes, do.
All right. So this is the work of Roger Hamilton, which actually dates back to, hold on, I'm going to have to pull out the book. It's too exciting. It dates back to the I Ching. I can't wait to start reading that. Which was made popular by Carl Jung. And this is a work called the flow dynamics, or the talent dynamics. And it's a really amazing profiling tool for helping entrepreneurs find their flow and find their wealth and just really get in the groove of it. For me, like when we chat about it, it's like a hack. Don't you feel? It's just like, it's this nice little hack that you can just apply, and then you find your own little singular, unique place on that prism. But it's this great tool.
Hack.
It's an easy hack, but it makes a world of difference.
A meaty hack, a meaty, easy hack.
Meaty. Oh, yes, absolutely. Meaty, easy, everything. And with that, we speak into these 4 quadrants. Then the 4 quadrants, I'll actually have to map them out. I'm just going to have to move over here and superimpose that. while I'm speaking into it, but it's this idea of working with the elements, working with the energies, working with the seasons, in terms of finding the kind of dynamic that you bring in. So at the very top, we have the dynamo energy. So would you want me to speak into the, just to kind of contextualize it, like the persona there, or?
Just a few words, that would be great.
Just a few words. So your dynamo energies is like your starter energy. A lot of you startup entrepreneurs that are going to be watching this are going to be definitely resonating with this. This is where you've got your head in the clouds, where you're really creative and looking for new ideas and constantly pushing the needle into flow on creativity, on innovation, on anything that's new and daring and bold and creative. Like that's really where you live. You live from your heart and you live from your mind, but it's all about that newness and that adaptability that you want to bring into the space. And just to go to the contrast of that, we when we're not in the sky, we're very much on the ground, and that's known as your tempo energy. So that's also epitomized by the kind of spring energy, that earthy kind of feel. So you can imagine that they would be very much grounded. They'd be a lot more practical in their approach to things. They'd kind of understand the nitty-gritty of things. They really want to understand an element for what it is and know how it works in relation to other things rather than necessarily noticing the big picture. So those are just two polarities in this grid. And with that, I want to pause and hand over to you because I can see that you're going to apply some wisdom to this as well.
Thank you, Lena. Thanks so much. So yes, I'm a dynamo. So that's that's a real creative energy. And then at the bottom is tempo. The tempo energy is much more in service. And then on the left hand side, you've got the
Blaze. Yeah.
People going out there, and gosh, do we need them? If we've got the wood, they're the fire. They're gonna start burning, and that's great. And you can see that it's an extrovert energy. And on the other side of that, you have got the steel. And so you can hear in just the typology, but it's a much more analytical energy and even more introverted. And what I was quite interested in was looking at that next to this, the idea of polarity wisdom, because for me, you've got obvious polarities there, and you have got a sense that, but hang on a minute, what are you actually saying? Because I'm creative, and don't ask me, please, to do that detailed stuff. And I will do it, but it's not my place. Whereas for other people, it's their genius. And when you've got a team, the whole idea is to bring your team in and allow that person to play there, and allow the connected blaze energy to go out and do their thing because they do it so well. And likewise, the tempo, that earthy, they're fantastic at getting things in the right time, and really seeing that that your service, you're creating a good service and following up on that. So the way that I resolved that, and again through the organization that you mentioned earlier, is two ways. One is to bring those, to be aware first of all of where you play, what your genius energy is, and to really focus on it. Don't be scared to focus on it. Go for it. Play there. Access your strengths. So in the same way that polarities are equal values, so are strengths and capabilities. They have an equal side to them that is neither better or worse. So play there, be in your genius there, and then see if you can bring in the areas that you'll need to complement you in order to move your business into a more sustainable ground. And whether that is, you bring them in fully as team members, and you're working with them and very specifically acknowledging them for their genius type, or whether it's you're looking out for them in your networking, or there might be a particular project and you need that particular energy to help you, and perhaps you can do an exchange. So I'm so sorry, I hope you can't see that on my screen.
No, not at all.
The other way that you can work with these polarities that exist are to really understand that acknowledging them, that's really That's where the mastery is. It's knowing that they exist, and although they might not be your strengths, at some point it's going to be helpful for you to work with that particular energy. So I've got a lovely thing, and it also comes from, I have to credit Roger Hamilton for this, but during the week, I will anchor my week on a Wednesday with my particular energy, which is a spring energy. It's the dynamic energy. It's asking the question, you know, what do we create? Where do we go? And then from that, working around the other energies. So Monday will be a day where I focus on my steel energy, and it gives me a great balance and rhythm to the way that I work and the way that I do my business. And I have to say that it's quite new, and I have to honor Lena because she introduced me to this, but it has made such a difference to the way that I work, because I'm not saying that I'm going to just do my figures, or, you know, or my tracking or my systems on a Monday, but I'm going to be very aware that that space is happening. And it might be that if...
And it's also a mind frame.
A mind frame.
Well, you know, it's not just the activity, but you're anchoring that part of you that's thinking differently. So even if it's not in your skill set, you're making more calculated decisions that actually serve you.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's forefront. You know, absolutely. And so, and you've got my blaze energy, or, you know, my blaze energy is coming in on the Tuesday, and so that's the day that I will go out and connect. And it might be then the day that I blog, or the day that I you know, I'm writing my mailers or whatever, and I'm really sensing that my tribe and the people that I want to serve out there as an energy. It also means that, you know, when you're having meetings with and in your teams around these particular kind of center points,
Projects, or
projects, you can also bring in that part of you, you know, and you can invite that part of you in, because you know, that's also just being responsible.
Yeah, because it's so easy generally for everybody to think when we go into a project mode, we just always need to be in the creative space. And we all know that even if we look around a boardroom or around a project room or around a coffee shop, we don't play those roles. We don't necessarily go into those. So drawing on those strengths and then creating it from the most fundamental place is so important.
Absolutely, absolutely. And also to realize, you know, in terms of going back to that polarity map, if creativity is one pole of a polarity, I'm just thinking on my feet. Well, the other would be service, for example. You know, it really depends, and I want to emphasize this on who you're talking to, or the business that you're talking to, the way you'll see this evidence by the experience, by the language, you know. So where you have that polarity, to know that there's going to be a downside of the creativity, you know, and for people who aren't living there, it can be totally exhausting. Oh my gosh, you know, Wendy's got another idea and we've all got to move, and now she's launching again and we've hardly settled, let alone tracked, you know, let alone found out what people think. And so it's that. And equally, you know, if I'm sitting there in that tempo energy, I need to be aware that, you know, for some people that might be a little bit kind of, you know, cautious, and, you know, here I am wanting to take risks.
Of course.
So this might sound really obvious, but I do think that there's a benefit to stating what is very obvious, and polarities.
The radically obvious is thing, and what was also emerging as you were speaking into that is other states, like the polarity of abundance. We so want abundance, and yet we don't know that it works in two ways. We so want integration, and we don't know that it works in multiple ways. And being able to notice that, and in mastery, and in whatever state we find ourselves in whatever mannerism we put out into the world, there's that space playing out, and knowing where you are and where you're coming from. So powerful.
Well, it was really interesting that there was a case study done with a very, very successful organization that, in terms of spiral dynamics, they were in the yellow. They were established, but they were thriving, and they were looking at this dynamic of what was going on. There was a disconnect around, abundance. Abundance. They were having this conversation around abundance and working out their. But on the other end of that spectrum was conservation. So there was a kind of disconnect going on in two areas. One was around the fact that, they valued this concept of abundance in spirit, abundance in they were well paid, abundance in terms of what they were delivering. But there was so much of that they were wasting. They were actually, wasting material and wasting time. And when they started to see the levels at which there was that wastage and how that was creating a disconnect in terms of their own higher values and their own higher purpose, they were able to work with it. And a similar example that I've used recently is an example of where you have an organization that is really able to articulate and feedback, but the emphasis is on feedback as opposed to being honest, open and honest. So I'm the lack there was they were so worried about actually upsetting the others because the value around respect was so great. So it was respect and feedback. And what the company actually wanted was really honest feedback, and it wasn't getting it because I respect you so much, I might now upset you.
Yes.
If I give you honest feedback. Subtle.
But
when you begin to wrap it, and unwrap it.
Makes such a huge difference. And I'm sure like entrepreneurs as well, they can see that as well, where you start almost, you have this need, you have this want, you have this desire, you have the space that you're stepping into, and yet it's holding you back from this other thing that you're also stepping into and holding in, which is that polarity again, and just this like edging between the two. And this doesn't necessarily have to be as traumatic as a tug and pull energy.
Yes, exactly.
It's very nuanced distinctions, and that's I think what I like the way we're talking about polarity, because before it was a traumatic this, that, or the other, and here it's those finer nuances.
Absolutely,
and make the world a difference.
From what you've seen with your clients who are entrepreneurs, where would you say that would be a very common polarity that you have seen, particularly in the startup space or the entrepreneurial? Have you noticed
the two that seem to be, or at least they're the most popularly sold by mass media as well, is your freedom and creativity as being one side of it, and your structure and stability being the other.
Yes. Yeah.
And, wanting to honor all parts of it, but not knowing how to navigate that space. And with that, I wanted to ask you a question, are these poles almost finite? Do we always go back to the same poles? Or I'm almost getting the visual of the Enneagram, sometimes you move into a quadrant and then that opens up another door, and then you start pivoting around something else, and you start pivoting around something else. So do they all feed off each other, or is there an ingrained pattern, which we all have anyway, that we constantly just keep that as our point of equilibrium?
Yes, that's such a lovely question. We will be experiencing different poles at different stages in our lives. So the classic one I remember as I was developing my coaching business was working in the business and working on the business, and that dance between the two. But equally, if you've got a complex system, what you often find is multiple polarities. And you can imagine if I'm drawing this now, you'll have one polarity here and another polarity here and another polarity that takes that pole, but in different spaces. And again, I mean, I just get very excited about this, because when you start to map it like that in a system, and you obviously begin to see how dynamic the system is, and how even, you know, the polarities within a system can be unpacked and given such clarity. But you also get nested polarities. So I'm not going to necessarily go here now, but when you're looking at politics, for example, you can see polarities between justice and mercy, and they become stacked. And so right down here, when you're having a conversation around race or privilege, or any one of a gender conversation, you'll actually be able to see that above that are a whole wealth of polarities. And to me, that they're quite, what's the word, archetypal, a lot of them. But we can begin to unpack them. And again, that gives us a framework to unravel complex social problems. Yeah.
Well, it's a beautiful, it's like I'm just getting like all these pieces of transparent paper, and it's just like another layer to the system of the world, the system of our businesses, like the ecosystem, like this blueprint. But it maps it out in a beautiful way, because this is, you know, these aren't just our thoughts, these are our social systems, these are actually tactile things, because we see them playing out. So it almost lets you find those little moments where things hook together, and you're able to see how they interlink and how they play, and like how this loop becomes this loop.
Absolutely. And when you said hooked together, it is. And, you know, my visual image there was straight away to knitting, which I find really hard, probably because that integration left right is hard. But yes, I think it helps you with unraveling, but also just keeping things really, really simple. So this is a framework where you can work with, for example, building in action steps to bring you into the upside of one pole. And then you can work together with your coach, with yourself, with a team, with your organization, to then also begin to see and identify, specify, actually write it down, the red flags or the early warning signs of the downfall. So I think it's a great system. It can be really practical, because with that you can start to see, you can start to note those early warning signs. So if I give a personal example, and I've used this example before, my expertise is in resilience, and I think a lot of that came out of and arose from the fact that I grew up with a propensity to drop into depressive episodes. So for me, I can really see this working in my personal life. And what I learned to do over time was to kind of notice what those really subtle markers, what those subtle signs, what those giveaway signs were when I was, moving into a kind of a downward spiral, or, and then I'd be able to catch them early. So really that's what we're talking about here, being able to catch the downward the downward cycle early. And then now I know what is on the other side of the polarity. So in this case, it would be, well, the higher purpose would be health. And knowing that I was going to bring in an upswing, I could then look for that, and I could create action steps around that, and move more freely into that. So, you can, when you start to see these, you see them everywhere. It's just, they live within their live energy systems.
Absolutely. And what I'm loving as well is, because naturally it would integrate so beautifully with the Presilience model, but it just adds so much depth and clarity to that. And something that you were mentioning earlier, actually, when you started about it, you talked about the resilience, but it was also a way of honoring presence, because it's like, I want to be present in the being, or I want to be present in the doing, and this is where I I choose to play, or in those things. So it really weaves into all of those different places.
Well,
So you just want to speak into that a little bit, because I love your formula. It's just so beautiful.
Presilience is a word that I've actually coined. You won't find it in the dictionary. And it's a combination of resilience, brilliance, and presence. And so the principles of Presilience are really threefold. And the one is trusting your truth. The second one is creating from love. And the third one is coming home to your unique center of Presilience. So for me, the primary tool of Presilience is finding your center point and knowing what that is. And for me, again, that speaks to that crossover point. So when you can feel yourself overextending in one area, to kind of feel into that, almost embody it, and then allow movement to come from that. That sounds a bit esoteric. Again, I want to kind of keep it simple. I'm going to be really personal. I'm going to risk being personal. I'm single. That means I've chosen to be single, but it also means that I'm very conscious of my masculine and my feminine. And so you can see this dance happening again. So when I perhaps get more into my masculine, I'm aware of what the benefits are, and it's beautiful, and I can see that in another and honor it in my relationships and in myself. But equally, I can see that there's a downside to that. And it's going to play out in terms of, if it becomes dysfunctional or overemphasized. It's when I'm losing sight of the other complementary values. So at that point, I'll move more into my feminine and allow myself to receive, give myself chance to be in flow, in conversation. Rest is there as opposed to action, and I know this is speaking to sort of archetypes, but you can begin to see how it works. And we see with a lot of my clients, and I work with a lot of lawyers, and for us to start to move and bring in some of the wisdom of the feminine into our leadership is really, really hard, where we have been overcommitted to one particular pole, and where we found that women in the workspace are very much addressing and using and overcompensating a more masculine form of leadership, which is linear and driven and rational and logical, and there's nothing wrong with that. And it is not to say that it is that is needs to be debunked. It is, how can we integrate that? How can we bring in, how can women, how can you and I bring in a different form of more feminine leadership without thinking that, I'm going to be accused of being irrational just because I'm talking about how I'm feeling. Let's we can integrate that and be witnesses to that, and actually pioneer that, and actually lead it.
Oh, beautiful. And it also speaks into so much of identity, because again, when we're dealing with one polarity, we identify with that. That becomes our unique signature on who we are supposed to be. And, woman in a corporate world is like, we've got to be playing it like the guys are doing it. Even though there has been a bit of a shift into that, there's still this competitive edge to try and do that, to try and get into the boardrooms and to be sitting on those wisdom councils. And the beautiful gift in this is it's and lends to the move back to authenticity, because it's just bringing all the elements of you into a conversation. At the end of the day, we're in a business that's human-centric. We're not in an androgynous space where we can just be running one program the whole time. We specifically decided to move beyond the industrial age to not be doing that one little thing anymore.
Yes.
So this is that beautiful shift to kind of acknowledge that.
That is so true. That's so spot on. And you've actually just made a beautiful link for me in this work as well. That, it's where it's learning to see where we over-identify with a particular role, or talent or pull. And that becomes, our identity, or, it can be more subtle. You don't sometimes realize that you're just over-identifying with it. That's beautiful, absolutely. Mm-hmm. And to be able to then bring in more of the opposite. I remember when I was very young, I was told that, but I don't get you, because 1 minute you're like this and 1 minute you're like that, and you're all of these different things. And I remember thinking for yes, well, schizophrenic, or gosh, well, and even recently being called Wendy the chameleon. And I realized that in my resilience research, that is an aspect that is a high level of resilience, because at one stage one can draw on this, and vulnerability, for example, and in another environment or another situation one can draw on strength. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you are splitting yourself off or being, as you said, unauthentic. You're being truly authentic. And I think that
as you said that, like your Brené Brown part of you, just the part of you that said soul sister with Brené Brown just popped up, and it's like, yes, please, thank you so much, because it's, we are all these different elements of ourselves. We play lots of different games, sometimes by design, sometimes by default, and the world is made up of polarities. Thing. So how do we bring all of ourselves? How do we accept all of ourselves and actually allow ourselves to be here in a world that still tells us to think inside the box, even though they're saying we're not? When they're still trying to constrict things and label things and all these other elements, and that part of you is not allowed to be expressed, or that idea or that boardroom isn't allowed to go where they need to go to create what they need to create.
Yes.
Because it feels like this is what we need to be hacking right now. Like, this is, as we start identifying more polarities, it's like, okay, our universe is just expanded, beautiful, as it would. And now how do we play within all the bounds of it, or the infinite bounds of it?
Yes, of course, and that would be true to the luminosity of what you're bringing to the world, in terms of how we can do that. But
naturally, I was like, hijack conversation. Like, oh, I want to play there.
How can we do all of that? I think it speaks to mastery as well, and agility, and it's trial and error. It's in some situations. House that's on fire, it's not going to be the best time to be democratic and wonder whether we all need to actually move and what we need to take. It's like, get the hell out, let's go. But it's to be aware of that capacity in us, and to have the courage to play there. So I would love to encourage the listeners to also experiment with this. Experiment with different sides of you, and it might shock a few people. But it's fun, but B, it develops an agility and a mastery. So experiment with it in terms of your leadership, but just experiment with it in terms of, you said something earlier now, it's about holding all those sides to us. And I think that what I love about the polarities is that we think that it's either black or white, and we want to resist the black. We think that it's happy or sad, and we don't want to go there because of, we don't like the sadness. Mm-hmm. But really, the richness of polarity is to say that if we can change the language and adopt two complementary opposites, and be clear on a higher purpose, then going to another aspect of that pole is not necessarily going to take us into the pits of despair or into something that's not aligned with ourselves, for example. Because there's going to be a natural movement out, and all it does is integrate and allow us to be more sustaining in who we are and what we're bringing into the world. The other thing that I think it does is that it stops us being stuck. So you'll find that systems play out a pattern for many years, and of course we do too. We might play out patterns in a day or in a week or in a month or in a year, but you find that a whole system will play out a pattern. For example, the classic decentralization or centralization, and the consultant will come in and get paid heaps to work out that the downside of the being centralized is X, Y, and Z, and that becomes the problem. And so what do we need to do? We need to solve, and the solving comes up here. But that's all we've done. So we're just, again, treating a problem as something that needs to be solved, as opposed to a polarity that needs to be managed. So then you'll just have an entire organization that will be playing on the other pole.
Or ping-pong between different poles.
Exactly. Countries do the same. History shows us this. So I really believe that this concept of integrating polarities holds so much wisdom to prevent those kind of real stuck cycles, where an entire, like you say, it might be our identity or it might be an organization's identity, becomes stuck in one thing. This is how we do things around here. And meanwhile, we're actually overdoing it because we aren't integrating, or we're not seeing, and we're not aware of the red flags. We're dropping down into the downside. And then because we're not able to necessarily see that on the other side, there is the downside of the opposite pole, which we don't necessarily want to go to. But if we can speak to that and bring it into the open and acknowledge that we don't necessarily want to go there, and none of us do, it's a great way to give feedback when you think of it like that as well.
Of course. Great way to create transparency and then to actually design something that actually has the DNA of something that serves the organization or the startup or the individual. Because it's like, this is an area that is a major concern for me. So let's actually bring this into the formula. Let's not forget about it and create this magical thing over here that'll make us feel happy. And yet this piece has not been addressed.
Absolutely.
Because then we're just working above the skin, and that's never going to... I mean, it sounds like purpose work, but it's not really... It doesn't have that depth, because I think the more you go deeper in, the higher you can go higher up. That spiral. Really, really, really powerful stuff, Wendy. And what a gift to bring that into the world at a time like now, when these conversations are unlocking and unfolding in so many ways, and people are starting to become aware of nodes and kind of going, ooh, what's that in the room? There's something there. And we've kind of been walking around it for this whole time, and now starting to get a name or an identity. I mean, we saw it in Brexit. We're seeing it in the US elections. It's happening in every dimension.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in one sense, what happened yesterday historically is just the downside of a particular political pole. That in the older framework might have been seen as the upside of another pole, but right now we're in it. So right now, where's the movement?
And I love what you just said there as well, like the gift that by one framework it could be the downside, by another perspective it could be the upside.
Yes.
So again, it's still not that structured. It depends what framework you're coming in from.
Yes. So that this kind of ability to, it is very hard, and I think you hit the key of it. It's over-identifying with what you think is right or correct, and I think that's what we're seeing so much of, in today's society, and we're holding on to that because it is our identity. So I'm just feeling the movement to speak into that a bit more, because for me, coaching is an interesting area in itself, and coaching has traditionally, historically been quite transactional, and then, and then it's becoming more and more transformational. But when you look and start to use coaching as a tool, or our conversations as a tool to explore our identity and to really start to unpack that, that becomes a really interesting conversation about who are you? Actually, who are you?
Mm-hmm.
And your our wish to kind of I'm a lawyer and define myself by this, or I'm a engineer. What do you lose by that definition? Or I'm a married woman, single mother, or we could think of I'm British, I'm black, I'm lesbian, I'm gay, whatever. That has its place. But I'm interested in and what else, and what are the boxes around that, and can we honor who you are and who you say you are and the essence of who you are, and bring in more than that? Mm-hmm. And what would it be like to embrace as part of your identity, a side of you that is connected to all things in time and space, mm-hmm. a side of your identity that is powerful? What would it be like if that was the conversation we had? Who are you? I'm a powerful being. I'm capable of creating. I'm an expression of a creative force.
Mm-hmm. You are. And so much more. Yeah, it's like we've just opened up the portal for an infinite game. And this is where it gets really exciting, but that doesn't mean that it's unstable. We're constantly still navigating. We're always somewhere on the map.
Yeah.
I think that was also one of my lessons, is like, just because everything's shifted around you, everything's disrupted or changed or grown, and there's more capacity, you're always standing on solid ground in something. And whatever that polarity is for you, whether it's the positive or the negative side, by your attribution, is how you get to define what that is.
And really, isn't that what we're being asked to do at the moment? To find our own positive ground, because when everything is so uncertain, what is our certainty? And by that I don't mean what is the thing about which you're so certain that you're prepared to go for war for. It's what are you certain about that is giving you the ability to be the eye in the hurricane. And to bring the polarity work back, I do think that this is a gift for that. It's a gift for sustainability. It's a gift for inclusivity. And what we've just seen in our recent history is the opposite of that. Is a lack of exclusivity. Inclusivity. So I just think that it's been around since the 1990s, and there have been a number of gifted teachers who've been bringing this work to the world. But I know that it's quite new to South Africa, and I also know that you've got listeners around the world. But a lot of us are experiencing very similar problems in terms of the way we see the world. And the way we try to problem solve, and I do think that this is a way to start to have a more collective and inclusive conversation. Poverty is not a problem. It doesn't have a right wrong answer. It's injustice is it's a complex thing, and so working with what polarities exist in that conversation. For me, I think that it's a language for its time.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, it's such a language for its time. along with so many of the other things you represent. So I just want to honor that as well, and let you quickly speak into that as we start wrapping up, and any final shares that you want to give with the audience.
I think what I'd like to just end with, and I'm just sort of settling into it, is to be playful around this, and just to notice where it's an either or situation, and where you can sort of bridge and see your own polarity, to see that it can be an either or situation, and to really just be light and playful about that. And secondly, to understand that this is a dynamic energy play, and to move with it. So my encouragement is to take risks, move into new action, experiment, and understand that you can trust yourself. We have self-correcting mechanisms. And as you begin to explore those and hold polarities, you'll see that you have your own self-correcting mechanisms. So keep coming back to your center and keep moving out from that.
Mm-hmm. As I shared in the Think Tank, it just reminded me the other day, was our center is our core self. This is where we find stability. This is where we find our sense of belonging. But our growth happens at our edges. So that's where we really need to be playing. And the more we play at our edges, the stronger our core can be.
Yes, absolutely.
Beautiful.
Thank you, Lena, so much for bringing what you're bringing to the world, and for bringing these conversations. They are joyous and needed, and beautiful work. Thank you so much.
And they always feel like they're always just the beginning, which is what I love about them. It's always just like that next new beginning.
Just opens the peak.
Absolutely, just a peek. Thank you, Wendy. So we'll have your website details running at the bottom of the screen.
Wonderful.
So everyone can come through and follow the amazing stuff that you do and things that you're up to.
Pick up my free ebook, please. Anybody who would like.
It's gorgeous. It is so gorgeous. Most beautiful thing in the world.
Absolutely. It's called the 10 keys, the 10 resilience and recalibration keys, and it takes you through the 10 fields of resilience, each one linking to a source of intelligence, but it's 10 steps to be super resilient. I don't know where that came from.
There we go.
There we go.
You're just on fire. You're just on fire. And then I'll also make, because we chatted at last year's summit, so I'll make that interview also available for anyone who wants to go to that link as well and listen to evolutionary intelligence and
oh, great. Yeah.
That forward thinking. Yeah.
Fantastic. Evolutionary intelligence was our last call. Wonderful. Thank you.
Our last call. It's amazing.